Please welcome to the stage President and CEO, Buckeye Power and OREC, Mr. Craig Grooms.
All right. Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? How about now? Y'all good? Okay, well, thanks for coming out. My first time at the Winter Conference up on stage, so be nice. I'm going to cover a lot of material, do a review of who we are, just for those of you who don't talk a lot about Buckeye or Ohio Electric Co-ops, do a quick review, get into some recent highlights, and then really do a full, broad view of what's going on in the industry and how we play a part of that. So the first slide, pretty much in every Buckeye Power or OREC presentation, here's our overview of the statewide. I think you all know 25 cooperative members serving about 400,000 members across Ohio and a portion of Northeast Indiana, about 1 million residents. Just over 1,900 megawatt peak load that we established that during the Christmas weekend of 2022. The cold period we just had a couple weeks ago came close to 1,900 megawatts, but it didn't beat it. It was upper 1800s. Our generation resources, I think you know, are well familiar with our coal plant out east. The Cardinal Station has 3 600 megawatt units. We have rights to 2 of those units. We're an 18% owner of OVEC, the Ohio Valley Electric Corporation, 2 power plants, the one in Ohio, Kiger Creek, and one in southeast Indiana, Clifty Creek. 2 natural gas power plants, the Moan plant up in Van Wert County, the Greenville plant over in Darke County, and a mix of renewables, mostly our hydro entitlement coming out of New York, and some power purchase agreements from a couple landfills, and a number of small solar sites across the state, and we have about 365 members, or 365 employees. So to give you an idea of just, even though it's typically on the map, to let you know what our power plants look like, starting in the upper left, the Moan plant in Van Wert County, 3 GE turbines, about 180 megawatts each. The Greenville plant, it's 4 twin packs, so that's over in Darke County near Greenville. Bottom left, the Clifty Creek plant, those are 6 200 megawatt coal units down in southeast Indiana. Of course, our Cardinal plant in the top right, and then the bottom left, or bottom right, our Kiger Creek plant, 18% owner of OVEC, that's 5 200 megawatt units. So I'm going to talk about what Buckeye and OREC provide for the statewide before we get into the other topics. So that's our transmission. That was our generation. This is our transmission. So we are a transmission-dependent utility, or the co-ops are primarily transmission-dependent utilities. And that means we take service from the existing system across the state. So you'll see the map of Ohio with all of our transmission voltage levels. The thickest lines are the highest voltage lines. So the very thickest you see there is the 765,000 volt lines. Below that, 345,000, 138, 69 kV. We take service from the 4 transmission owners in Ohio, AEP, AES, the former Dayton Power and Light, ATSI, which used to be referred to as First Energy, and Duke Energy, and we take service at about 435 delivery points across the state. So we're not, as a statewide, we're not just the G&T, we're also a statewide organization. To remind you of those services that we provide and what our goal is, we really want to be a strategic partner with the co-ops. We want to make your lives better, we want to make the lives of your members better, and help you as co-op employees and directors do your job better. So that means having to staff for legislative and government affairs, advocating for reasonable rules, whether that's at the state legislature, federal level, or even with the EPA. Our communications team is really all about communicating the co-op message, the benefits of the co-op model, and what we can do to make their lives easier, and really in the provision of affordable and reliable power, what we can do to make their lives better in terms of just being an electric co-op member. Our safety training, loss prevention group includes COLT. Again, for us, safety is number one. I know safety is number one for all the co-ops, and everything that we can do to support that mission is important to us. And then cooperative development. We all need quality employees. We have marketing programs. We have a number of educational opportunities. And I referred to in our board meeting today, I attended my first Leadership Edge graduation a couple weeks ago, and I was really impressed by the quality and the commitment of a lot of co-op employees across the state. So I was very impressed, and it's good to see. And I think you all should be glad to hear that as well, about the employees from your co-ops doing a great job. So recent highlights. If you really look back at 2024 and beyond, what we've been able to accomplish is, again, our primary mission is providing affordable and reliable electricity. And we've been able to do that during a very volatile period. If you think back a decade, we've had a lot of volatility. It's usually, let's say you get it for a year, then it'll go away for a couple years, then you'll get it again, whether it's an international situation, whether it's a domestic situation. We've been able to provide stable electricity rates. If you think back over the last couple years, the big story was Ukraine, Russia, a disruption in the energy markets, a rerouting of energy across the globe. By having a hedge plan, by purchasing long-term coal under contract over 2-3 years, we're able to ride through a lot of that uncertainty, and we really saw it over the last couple years. We invest in our power plants. The Cardinal plant, if you go back to last winter, they had a record run. I don't remember the exact number of days. I think it was about 150 days. It was an amazing run. It beat the record that they had a number of years ago, but it really just goes to the fact, and it shows if you make investments in your resources, you should expect more reliability, more consistent operation, and I think we're seeing that. It doesn't mean we don't have problems, but I think we're really seeing the benefits of those investments. January was cold for the electric business. That's generally good. Our power plants performed well, especially if you look back a couple weeks when it got really cold. We had pretty much every generator that we have available to us online. And so it was a really, I think, a good outcome for our co-op members. It kept the volatility low, and it kept our power prices reasonable. And then advocacy. We all know what we've faced over the last couple years, but it really goes back more than the last 3 or 4 years. It's really go back, let's say 15, 16, 17 years. There's been this very severe resistance and opposition to primarily coal plants, but also really any fossil fuel usage, not just for power generation, any usage of fossil fuels. So part of what we've been doing with you as our partner is advocating for reasonable rules. We have to recognize that whatever an energy transition means, that means different things to different people. We have to have reliable and we have to have affordable energy, primary electricity for us. And you can't just make regulations and laws and just hope for a good outcome. You really have to plan and be smart about your planning, and that's what we want to do, and that's what we want legislators to understand, what it means to produce electricity, what it means to deliver electricity, and that's a big part of what we do, is advocating, making sure they understand what it takes to provide affordable electricity and really help them understand things so they can make reasonable rules, write reasonable legislation. Some more highlights. Again, so we're executing on our plan for reliable power supply at a competitive rate. But we're also recognizing, okay, the OVEC units that we are 18% owner of, those 2 plants are about 70 years old. They're still reliable, they're still affordable, they're still worthwhile, and we appreciate having them around. The Cardinal plant is about, 55 years old. Still a reliable resource. We continue to invest in it, but we have to recognize at some point, whether it's just load growth or environmental regulations, we may have to consider doing something different. And so to plan for that is really, what does our financial house look like? And what we've done over the last couple of years with our board is accelerate the depreciation, essentially the write-down of our Cardinal assets. So if we ever have to make a change, we'll be ready for it, and we won't strap our existing members or new members with cost for resources that they don't get the benefit of. Now, I'm not predicting that we're going to get rid of any of our coal plants. I'm just saying we have to be financially responsible and plan for that day if it happens, so we don't saddle members with costs that are unnecessary. OVEC's doing the same thing. I think we've heard a lot of commentary in the news about the OVEC plants. We have, I think, 11 different co-owners. There's challenges sometimes with those co-owners because they don't have rate recovery. And so they've been doing the same thing going back 5 or 6 years. They're going to plan to do it for the next 5 years and really put their financial house in order. And so if they ever have to do something different, it won't be a huge impact to existing members. And again, I say that recognizing that they're still reliable resources. We invest in the O&M, capital investments, and we plan to have those resources available for some time. So planning for the exit of AEP at Cardinal. So I think you all know AEP has been a very important partner for Buckeye Power and Ohio's electric cooperatives. Things have changed dramatically over the last couple of decades, but going back to 2015, the Ohio legislature passed laws that effectively forced the investor-owned utilities to divest or get rid of their generation resources. So we took over, a couple years later, we took over the operation and the full ownership of the Cardinal plant. And AEP made an agreement. Since this was essentially not in their rate base, they could not get recovery for their share of Cardinal. They wanted to exit that. And so they made an agreement with the Sierra Club that, hey, we'll shut our unit at Cardinal down by 2030 in exchange for some things that they actually never received. And so it was a bad deal for AEP. But it's still a contractual requirement. Have this legal liability, an agreement with the Sierra Club to shut one unit down at Cardinal. Because of an EPA rule, AEP had to back that date up to 2028 because they did not want to invest in the emission control equipment for the EPA rule. And so AEP said, we will shut a unit down at Cardinal by 2028. So as a reminder, Buckeye Power and Ohio's electric co-ops, we own and operate all 3 units at Cardinal. AEP now takes essentially a power purchase agreement for the offtake of their share. So we're planning for that shutdown. It doesn't impact us or the Ohio's electric co-op members because we will still continue to own and operate units 1 and 2. The amount of electricity we get out of Cardinal will not change. Really the only thing that will change is that AEP will no longer participate and then we'll be forced to shut down unit 3 at Cardinal. So that's I would say those are the legal requirements right now. Absent some kind of a change, we will be obligated to shut down unit 3, step in, operate units 1 and 2. Co-op members should not see a change, and actually they should see a benefit of a slight cost reduction because operating unit 1 and 2 together is a bit more efficient. So more recent highlights. So we're not just Buckeye Power, the G&T, we're also an organization that helps co-ops and co-ops across Ohio, co-ops across the nation, make lives better for their members and really to operate as a partnership with each other. And we really see that in the form of mutual aid. You all are well aware of the amount of mutual aid that we provide with each other, to each other across the state. And I think you all are aware of what happened last fall with the hurricanes and the amount of damage that was done in North and South Carolina. I think we sent upwards of 150 line workers from Ohio. I've heard, talking with Dwight Miller, I think there were thousands of line workers from around the country helping those communities put their lives back together, put their systems back together. So again, it's a great benefit of being a co-op member and having this ability to lean on each other when we need it. A shout out to our communications team. So the 2024 Haggard Award, which is for the Ohio Cooperative Living Magazine, was awarded to our group for the 2024 year. It was a great accomplishment, and it really shows the strength of the team. If you go back a couple years, they won this award in 2018, they won it in 2022, and again in 2024. So again, compliments to that team, Jeff McAllister, Amy Howitt, and Neil Kindig do a great job. Karen Whitney and the rest of the communications group support those efforts. So again, props to them. We just finished Project Ohio in Guatemala, helping a village electrify a number of community members there. Group spent a couple weeks down there. Everything I've heard, it was a successful trip. A little bit of a challenge, in these countries. I think all of you are familiar with how challenging it can be to operate in these kinds of countries. A lot of, say, governmental, political hijinks, if you will, things that don't operate as smoothly as you would hope. So they didn't get to electrify the system, but we're hoping that they can work through those issues and get that done soon. The Farm Science building, so if you ever go to the Farm Science Review, it's a great time. We have a building there, so if you didn't know, that building was demolished by a tornado earlier in 2024. And we were able to get it reconstructed and opened by the Farm Science Review that occurred in September. So it was a great effort. Everybody, all hands on deck, trying to get that building back, and we worked with a great contractor to get that building constructed. We're starting a new cyber risk assessment program. So we all are aware and hear all the time about the cyber risks that we have out there. We've had a cyber assessment program patterned off of a program that NRECA started a few years ago that I think has been successful. It's patterned after the RESAP program, where we do safety inspections. This is really just taking it to the next level. And so we've hired a cyber risk assessment program manager with a lot of significant experience in this field. Eric Foxer, we hired him in late 2024. We had our first steering committee meeting a couple weeks ago, so this program is up and running. Well, I should say we're working to get it up and running, but I think it's going to be a huge impact to co-ops across the state. Legislative and government affairs, again, I mentioned this already, we've been very active over the last couple years. I don't think that's going to go away, but we'll get into expectations from the new presidential administration, but it's going to be an ongoing challenge to make sure we have rules and regulations that allow us to operate as co-ops. And then finally, again, going back to safety being number one, I think we're all very proud of the program at Colt that's been built up. You know, a lot of line workers have gone through there. It's very life-changing, I'd say, experience. And we're hoping to build on that. Kyle Hoffman has gone to some of our partner co-ops in Northern Ohio, but his legacy will remain, and I think we'll be able to continue to operate a solid program there. So before I get into the industry update, I'll just do a quick check to see if there's any questions about who we are, what we've done over the last couple years, and then we'll move forward if there's no questions. Anything? Okay. So industry update. Quick picture here on the left. That's your Cardinal plant. It looks like it's a drone, but it's above Unit 3, looking across the coal pile towards Units 1 and 2, and then looking down the stack of Unit 3. So thanks to Tim. So let's talk about PJM, and we talk about PJM a lot. It's the regional grid operator for actually the largest RTO in the world by population. Some 67 million people live in the footprint of PJM. PJM is our balancing authority, which means they dispatch generation plants to make sure there's enough electricity to serve load. They're the reliability coordinator. They make sure that the grid is reliable. And then what I'm going to focus on is they're the transmission planning authority, and they operate a competitive market for energy and capacity. And again, competitive market for energy and capacity, that's their goal. It's not actually what they are able to accomplish. They've been very challenged over the last couple of years, but that's their mission, is to have a competitive market for energy and capacity. So for transmission, in terms of reliability, 2024 was a really good year. We have we have a power delivery reliability committee that meets twice a year, and we evaluate transmission performance across the state and how well it's done. 2024 produced the best results we've ever had, and we think that's a combination of a lot of investments that have been done. We've also had generally good weather, knowing that we still have had some challenges, but it really hasn't impacted transmission reliability too much. And then we have a group back at Buckeye that works closely as transmission-dependent utilities. That means we're dependent on the transmission owners to do a good job with their system to deliver electricity to our member system. So we work very closely with them to make sure they're doing the things that we want them to do, and they're addressing the concerns that we have to make sure reliability is good. So when we talk about transmission, I've said this already, but one of our biggest cost drivers, being a transmission-dependent utility, is that all the transmission owners in Ohio, across the PJM footprint, and really across the country are making a lot of investments in transmission. And that translates into higher cost, and we hope better reliability. They're replacing a lot of old infrastructure. We're hearing about these mega loads, Intel, a lot more manufacturing, and then primarily data centers. Power flow changes have disrupted the grid a little bit. We've had a number of coal plants retire, new plants come online, and so that redirected power flow requires transmission upgrades sometimes. And then it's also an opportunity. So Ohio is a deregulated state. PJM has a lot of deregulated states, which means those investor-owned utilities don't necessarily have the ability to earn a return on generation. Pretty much everything that drives their earnings is their investment in transmission, and that's what we're seeing. So this is the existing transmission system across PJM, and so the different colors represent different high voltages. The red is 500 kV out in eastern PJM. The greenish, yellowish color is AEP's 765 kV system, and then the blue is the 345 kV system. So that's essentially where we're at right now. But because of these changes, the reason why there's going to be a lot more transmission investment to deal with all the data center loads, change in the locations of power plants is going to require a lot more upgrades. And this is what we're projecting. So this is a high level expectation based on what PJM has told and worked with the members across their footprint about dealing with overflows and pockets of heavy loads. So we've heard about Northern Virginia, I think, which is the center point of most data center construction. A lot of the transmission build out in the east is really to deal with Northern Virginia and the fact that Maryland and other parts, they don't have a lot of generation. So if you don't have generation where the load is, that means you've got to import it in. And so AEP, this is based on some of their planning of the areas where they think significant transmission investments will be required. And then if you look in central Ohio, we've talked a lot about the data center growth. That is some of the work that they're projecting will be needed over the next 10 years or so. And to that point, if you look at Ohio, here's a slide, a map. All the circles represent existing power plants. You can see the location of Buckeye Power's power plants, but in central Ohio, where they're expecting the load to double over the next 5 to 6 years, very little power plants. And so again, if Ohio doesn't have the regulatory structure to build generation, that means you have to build transmission to import power, and that's what we're seeing. I know there's a few early House bills and potentially a Senate bill that might try to incentivize more generation, but Ohio really doesn't have the regulatory structure to allow generation or for them to direct the investor-owned utilities to build more generation. So what we're left with is more transmission to import power, and that's what we're looking at unless something changes. So how are we going to serve all this load, the increases in load that we're expecting? The slide on the left, you've probably seen this before. It's actually a couple years old, but I think it represents what PJM and really every region across the country is dealing with. If you look at the pink line escalating over time, that was their projection of load a couple years ago. So they were saying, oh, we think there's going to be 10 to 15,000 megawatts more load required. At the same time, they were expecting a reduction in the amount of generation that they have, driven by EPA regulations and a number of states across PJM that had very aggressive renewable mandates that were essentially forcing power plants offline. So after Winter Storm Elliott during the Christmas weekend of 2022, afterwards they came out with this and said, hey, we have a problem. We're losing generation, or we think we're going to lose generation. At the same time, we're starting to hear more about this data center growth, and we're concerned. So that was about 2 years ago. If you look at where we're at now in 2025, the load projections for data centers have increased dramatically. So they're now expecting, I think it's, I don't want to call it an embellishment, I think it's an overestimate or over forecasting, but they're anticipating potentially 50,000 megawatts in the next 6 to 7 years or so. I think that's a little aggressive, but it's possible because they're basing their projections based on information that they're receiving. So, again, the problem is, how are you going to serve this much load if it actually shows up? So that's the question. How are we going to supply this load? The top left is the existing generation capacity in PJM, about 180,000 megawatts. Half of that is gas, mostly dispatchable generation, gas, coal, nuclear, hydro, and a little bit of solar, wind, and some other things. If you look at what they call the interconnection queue, those generators that want to interconnect to the system, in the bottom left you can see very little, almost zero amounts of generation capacity that's dispatchable. Primarily it's solar, batteries, and wind asking to interconnect to the PJM grid. So that sets off alarms for PJM saying we can't serve load with intermittent weather-dependent resources. If you look at what we have in Ohio at the top right, 60% gas, a lot of coal, more nuclear, and then a smattering of solar and wind. So how are we going to serve more load? The bottom right is the generation that's in the PJM interconnection queue to interconnect in Ohio. Huge amount of solar, some storage, wind, very little bit of natural gas. So again, the equation doesn't balance, and we got to figure out what to do. NERC is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. They're responsible for reliability standards, reporting on issues across the grid, and enforcing reliability standards to make sure electric companies are doing what they need to, or doing their part of maintaining a reliable grid. So this is the most recent assessment. So if you look at high level what they've said, during normal cold weather, again, cold weather in the wintertime, that's hard to define. They said things should be okay. Should not have any shortfalls. If you look at PJM in the sort of the shaded lines, there's a lot of natural gas. You get up into New York, New England, they have even more natural gas on a percentage basis. And NERC and others have said, well, if there's a gas disruption and it's cold, you've got a problem. And so they're making sure people are aware of that. Other areas, MISO, SPP, they've had a reduction in dispatchable generation, and NERC continues to point that out. And what NERC has really done a good job over the last year and a half in pointing out is, a lot of this is driven, this is self-inflicted. These are regulatory policies, state laws, federal EPA regulations that is causing this, and we need to change what we're doing. So sounding an alarm, PJM has started a new process. They're going to try to incentivize new dispatchable generation to come online. They've testified at FERC. They're talking to a lot of states, trying to make sure people and legislators are well aware of the issue. NERC is reporting, educating officials. We all have been very active. I know Pat O'Loughlin has testified on Capitol Hill. We interface with legislators, regulators as much as we can, making sure that they understand the concern. We have a new FERC chairman, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who is a former state regulator for Virginia, I believe. Very consumer friendly. I think he'll be a great ally for us. He has advocated for many of the things that we have, so I have high hopes that he will be renominated when his term ends in June, and I think that'll be a positive for the entire industry. And then the Trump administration has acknowledged all of these concerns, and I think we're seeing, even over 3 weeks, that they're going to try to reverse as much as they can. So what does it mean for us? Well, again, I think we're extremely well positioned to navigate all of this volatility. The long-term focus of owning and operating power plants is paying off. We've seen it in the past. I think we'll see even more examples of that going forward. So it really goes to the forethought of our leaders to make sure, hey, we need to invest in our resources. They may not always be the cheapest, but if they're affordable and reliable, we need to make those investments, and they have done that. So we think as we analyze what could happen over the next 5, 10, 15 years, I think we're in a very good place in terms of affordability and reliability. But we need to continue advocating for sensible rules because we are all electrically connected. Whatever we're doing has an impact on the rest of consumers in Ohio. Whatever is happening across Ohio, PJM across the country, in terms of the electric industry, in terms of generation capacity, it impacts us all because we use the same power grid. So we need to continue advocating for reasonable rules. So changing gears a little bit. So those are some of the concerns. I think we're very well positioned for success, even with all these challenges. And just to talk about some of those successes, we've had a number of new companies announce that they're going to locate their facilities in co-op territory. So top left, we've got our first data center coming in, going to be served by the Energy Co-op. Bottom left, Honda has made a renewed commitment to Honda Marysville that they're going to build their new electric vehicles there. In the same plant that they'll also build hybrids, same plant that they'll build internal combustion engine vehicles as well. So I think it's just a renewed commitment from Honda, which was great to see. The top right, Anduril just recently announced that they're going to build their first large-scale manufacturing center down near Rickenbacker, which will be served by South Central. If you ever get a chance to look up some videos of Anduril, it's pretty impressive. It's the future of warfare, I think. A lot of drone and automated vehicles. Very impressive, so that was a great announcement. And then I know not everybody's growing. I wish everybody could get more neighborhoods and residential growth, but we are seeing that in pockets across the state. So I think as a network across the state, I think it's great. I talked a little bit about employee development. We've had a number of great leadership edge classes. We have a couple other leadership classes that have happened over the last year or so that mostly co-op CEOs have participated in. We have a new Leadership Elevate program that's starting up, so I'm looking forward to those programs being successful. And then again, Colt. I think, I can't stop talking about Colt. I'm very impressed by the people who work there, the facility, the results that I've seen in terms of the graduates, and so we're going to do everything we can to keep that operating at a very high level. We talked about mutual aid, just the benefit of being a co-op, the benefit of the co-op model, the ability to lean on each other when we need it has been very impressive. Project Ohio, we talked about it. Here's a few slides. I know we're going to have a more in-depth presentation. I look forward to hearing that, but again, it's a great program. Our ability to offer assistance to areas around the country that need our help. And so a lot of questions coming over the last few weeks, and really even after the election, what are we expecting from the Trump administration? And so a lot has happened. An amazing amount has happened over the last 3 weeks. A lot of it in the form of an executive order, which is really important, I think, in signaling what the administration wants to see done. It doesn't necessarily have strong legal standing, but it really tells us that, hey, over the course of 2025, they're going to be working to make the conditions more favorable to our industry, and I think more favorable to our entire economy and country. A couple executive orders that directly impact us, but it's regulatory relief. That's what they're signaling, is that they're going to make it easier for the electric industry to provide affordable and reliable power, and I think we'll be very supportive of that. And then we're hyper-focused on these EPA rules because they do have an impact to all coal plants, including ours. And so we've heard that the EPA has already asked to suspend the litigation of those rules. We think we're going to see continued announcements over the next couple of weeks, and so we're going to do everything we can to support the administration there. And then in summary, again, the focus on long-term owning, operating, and investing is paying off. It has paid off, and I think it will continue to pay off. We'll continue to advocate for sensible rules to make sure we can operate in a favorable environment. But we really need to stay unified and support each other. When you look across the country, we've heard stories of other states where there's been internal squabbles, where some co-ops have wanted to fight with each other. And I think they lose focus on what they're doing. Those states that have to deal with internal squabbles no longer have the influence that they would have if they were able to focus on a singular mission. I think that's the benefit of Ohio, is that we're all in this together, and because we don't have to worry about fighting with each other, we can focus on the things that are really important for co-op members. So that's it. That's my summary. Co-op business model is strong in Ohio. I think things are going well. We've seen some economic development. We have great assets, affordable, reliable, and we have great people. So I'm really pleased. I've been in the role for about 5 weeks now, and so far so good. So I appreciate the time, and happy to answer any questions you have. Yeah, go ahead.
Joe, do you mind using the microphone?
I don't need it, but I will.
Everybody else needs it.
With Trump wanting to make all the big cuts in government spending and stuff, what concerns do you have on the impact to the cooperatives in OEC, especially FEMA?
Well, yeah, FEMA is a concern if we ever have an emergency. And I have to think that his intention is not to cut FEMA funding for true emergencies. I think what we're seeing over the last few weeks and what we'll probably continue to see is stop the flow and figure out what's really wrong and then put back in place what's right. And that's what I think is happening. I think he'll fund FEMA. I think FEMA will continue to be an operating agency. And then we're dependent on the ability of the EPA is still going to exist in some form. So, all these agencies, the Department of Energy has to exist. It's going to help invest in the future of energy. But I think these actions are going to help refocus the mission of these agencies to get back on what they're supposed to be doing and get away from a lot of the slush or the excess that they've been caught up in over the last few decades. So again, I think it's when you have a problem, it's stop and then reassess and then put back in place what I think is working. And I think that's what they'll do. But I probably know as much as you. We have to have some federal agencies and they have to function. It's really, they need to, I think, be reduced down to size to focus on what they're supposed to be doing.
Greg, I think I heard you say that the legal and regulatory environment in Ohio is not conducive to new generation. So what at the state level would need to take place for new generation to be built?
A good question. So, the state effectively outlawed investor-owned utilities from investing in building new generation and earning a return on that and having a customer class support the cost of that generation. So if the investor-owned utilities or any other merchant generator wanted to build a new power plant in Ohio, they are taking the risk that the PJM marketplace will compensate them for their investment. So we saw that going back 15 years, this explosion of shale gas plants being built in Ohio, a lot of gas plants being built in Pennsylvania. That was private capital investing in a market that they thought would provide returns. The state, if you want to put that in quotes, doesn't necessarily have that ability in Ohio. Ohio effectively, outside the co-ops and the munis, turned over generation planning to PJM. And they bought into this concept that this market would provide all the incentive and adequate compensation to pay for private entities making these investments. And consumers would no longer have to take on the risk of $1 billion investment. It would be some private equity or private generator making that investment. So sounds great in theory, it works sometimes, but as we're seeing now, the PJM market has essentially been dysfunctional. It doesn't work the way it's supposed to work in writing. And that's what we've seen in the interconnection queue. There is no fossil fuel generation proposing to interconnect to the grid because they have come to realize that they will not be compensated through the PJM market. So we're aware that Ohio has introduced, I think some legislators have introduced some proposed legislation to incentivize generation. I don't know if it's going to be enough. I don't know if taking the tax burden off generation will be enough incentive to invest $1 or $2 billion in an asset with no expected forward stream of revenue. So I think it's going to be a challenge. And I know a lot of the legislators in Ohio have said they don't want to re-regulate and put generation back in under the IOUs. I don't know if that's necessary or not, but I think they may have to have a statewide program where the state agrees that they will guarantee payment for a power plant owner-operator to build a plant. There's got to be some kind of, I think, a guaranteed return or at least sufficient revenue to support the cost.
Craig,
Hey, Jim.
politics and public policy changes over time. Just curious, you talked about the depreciation at the OVEC, or maybe OVEC and Cardinal. Can you tell us, and I don't want to try to stump you, but just curious, when is the debt paid on both those?
We think OVEC's debt, so OVEC as an organization, we think their debt will be paid off by 2031. Cardinal, again, we've increased the depreciation. Our expectation is Cardinal debt will be paid off in the 2037 timeframe, mid-2030s. but it's decreasing rapidly, and every year puts us in a better position if it became a stranded asset and we just had legacy debt on it. It would be less of a burden to co-op members. But that's the time frame we're looking at. The next 5 years, OVEC has this accelerated, I'd say, recovery of their debt. They're essentially just expensing it out to all the sponsors. And we're going to see elevated cost over the next 5 years, but beyond that, I think as long as OVECs continue to operate, it will be a much more favorable environment, and the cost will be much, much more reasonable. Hey, Robert.
Yeah, so when do we, what's the future look like to not retiring Plant 1? Are we still keeping our eye open there, and is there any talk of that?
Yeah, so operating Cardinal
common
as a
sense?
3-unit plant makes perfect sense. You know, we're following through because we agreed to the obligation that AEP had, knowing that it wouldn't impact our position. It would take an arrangement with AEP and the Sierra Club to modify their existing contract. So we are in the process of putting a new pollution control equipment for wastewater in service over 2025 for units 1 and 2 that we will operate. That system is only sized for 2-unit operations. It's not sized to operate 3 units. So we would need either an EPA waiver to allow the 3rd unit to operate beyond 2028, or we would have to make some investment at some period if AEP decided that they wanted to stay somehow involved and have an offtake agreement from us for one of the units. So it's a contract requirement or liability obligation that AEP has. It's an EPA issue that would have to be satisfied before we could operate all 3 units beyond 2028.
So Craig,
Roger.
we talk about AEP's agreement with the Sierra Club. What legal ramifications,
Yeah.
what legal authority does the Sierra Club have with that? And you said that they have not fulfilled some of their obligations to AEP anyway.
Yeah. Well, it's a contract that they have, so they would be sued, and then you would go to court, and they would fight over what the obligation of AEP was to satisfy what the contract says. We assumed that obligation when we bought the plant and agreed to operate unit 1 and 2 and shut 3 down. So that was how we got into ownership of the Cardinal plant. It's a contract that they have. So they would go to court, they would fight it out, and who knows how it would turn out. So that's one thing, but as I was telling Robert, we have this EPA issue where this effluent limitation guideline for wastewater, which was issued in 2020, the system that we're building now is only built for 2 units. So we have a couple issues we would have to deal with. But we might get, if things are bad enough, the EPA may be able to give us waivers to allow the operation of 3 units. So I would say that's the wild card. Yeah. I agree with you. It's something that's been done, and it wasn't necessarily our battle. So for us to step into that would, again, you're risking litigation and all that. So.
When was that signed by the Sierra Club?
Is Kurt here? Probably 2018, I think. And they had agreed, it's interesting, they made this agreement with the Sierra Club, and in return, they were hoping to build a bunch of renewables in Ohio and put those into their rate base. Well, that didn't happen, but Sierra Club still has their commitment to shut down 8 Cardinal units. So they clearly won on this, and AEP lost badly.
Do we have addresses of all the people in the Sierra Club so we know what going on?
Yeah, that's a good point.
First of all, Craig, thank you for this great overview. It was really a great synopsis. We have cleaned up our coal plants in Ohio. I am just curious, since we're going to still need coal for a while and maybe a long while, what's the statistics out there nationwide of coal plants being cleaned up to the caliber that ours is?
I would say coal plants still operating, different regions of the country require different pollution control systems. I would say the plants operating in our, multi-state neighborhood are very similar. They have all, we invested in what we have because we're complying with EPA rules that all coal plants are obligated to comply with. And so the investments we have made are similar to what the investments are for other coal plants who plan on operating through the long term. Yeah, I don't think we're in a special class. I think we've done what is necessary to continue operating.
Craig, what challenges do you think you and Buckeye Power have in the next 4 years? And I know they've changed a lot here since from the time you interviewed for the job. So what do you think the next 4 years are going to look like?
We're going to continue to talk about data centers and load growth. Anthony and I were talking earlier before this, and we've talked a little bit about it as a network. This feels like a bubble with data centers and AI. Hopefully we get more manufacturing load. I think we're going to continue to talk about that. If we do see coal plant retirements over the next, let's say, 3 or 4 years, we're going to start to have more periods where we have operational challenges. We came through the cold stretch a couple weeks ago with no problems. We're going to be fighting about for the next 4 years, I think we'll get a reprieve from EPA rules if they're successful. It's really all about, my focus is transmission costs are going to continue to escalate because for all the reasons we talked about, the need and the opportunity for transmission owners. So we're going to have to manage those costs, invest in our generation. I think OEC, the Ohio co-ops, are in a good position, but as an industry, it's going to be about regulations. It's EPA. We have a 4-year window. We may have some other challenges in 4 years, depending on how the election goes. That's what I'm thinking about. I'm somewhat hyper-focused on just getting these 2024 EPA rules repealed and rewritten and changed so we have some certainty, because until we get that, we have rules, final rules, that essentially say we have to shut down coal by either 2032 or 2034. So those need to go away. As a statewide, it's development, employee development. I'm really pleased with the programs that we have, and at a minimum, I want to see those continue to be successful, and hopefully we can build on that. I don't think we're going to get into a situation, I know we've been planning for potential load shed, rolling blackouts because of what happened in 2022. I think the grid operators will be much more proactive, and I'm not happy to say that there'll be more appeals for energy conservation. I think there'll be few unexpected emergency load shed events outside of some kind of emergency situation on a pipeline, let's say. So I think that'll be manageable, but I don't think we want to live in a world or in a country where whenever it gets cold, we have the governor saying shut down schools, shut down businesses, turn your thermostat down just to get through a cold stretch of weather. So I rambled a little bit. I don't know if I touched on your question. What are my primary concerns? It's really operational performance, making sure the power plants are operating, having strong financial strength. We have a volatile grid that we're part of. We talked about it today at the board meeting, but being able to respond if some of our power plants are on outage, and we have a lot of market volatility, that could cost a lot of money, so we need to have the ability to respond to that. Transmission costs, I think, are going to creep up, but that's just not us. That's impacting everyone. So it's not a competitive disadvantage to co-ops. I think our rates are still going to be very attractive in the state, which hopefully puts the co-ops and the co-op members in a good place. So.
Craig, one other thing you didn't mention, this kind of tee it up for you, which we've talked about as a staff, kind of the legislative proposal like House Bill 15 and Senate Bill 2, kind of seems like potentially a generational change, kind of like going all the way back to 1999 and making sure we kind of protect our cooperatives and Buckeye Power from any kind of significant cost impact, or kind of, how we deliver our reliable electricity right now.
Yeah, unintended consequences. Even if we have legislation or proposed legislation from our legislative allies, right? I mean, it's a difficult industry to understand, and they may not understand the impact of co-ops in particular. So I can understand Ohio wanting to restructure some legislation to incentivize generation, and a legislator may think, hey, I'm accomplishing that through this legislation without recognizing the impact, like to your point, that it has on us or other businesses. And so that's going to be really important to make sure we educate our legislators, make sure they understand the co-op business model and why we should be left out of any of the proposals, because we're doing a good job on our own. And I think we hear that from them, but then, I know they've got in their ear 50 other people and companies advocating for certain things. And I think we're seeing this in the proposed legislation. There's probably some merchant generation companies, some private equity companies in the ear of these legislators saying, if you just do this, that'll solve all your problems, when in reality that's not the truth. So we need to keep pushing, keep us out of regulation, but also help them make good decisions. Even for things that don't impact us, we want it to be good for the state and help them understand that.
Yeah, I was just curious on whether or not, worst case scenario, Unit 3 shuts down. Where are we in terms of any kind of feasibility, looking at small nuclear or gas generating or peaking plant? Do we have anywhere we're leaning in terms of feasibility for utilizing those assets? Yeah,
I've said, a couple of us have said over the last couple of years, I have a renewed appreciation for our existing power plants. Because for the longest time we thought about making them as effective and operationally sound as possible, and now we're thinking, where they're great as they are, they might be an expansion opportunity. So we are looking very closely at what the options might be if we have to expand. We have 2 gas plants. Moan in particular has a lot of available land. It has a high voltage interconnection. It has a high capacity gas transmission line that runs right by the property. That's key. There are other locations we would look for those same attributes. If you look at the new gas generators that are built, they essentially triangulate. They look, where's the electric transmission, where's the gas transmission line, and is there available land? And that's where they zero in, and that's where they build gas plants. But we may not have to do that with existing sites. Cardinal is a potential option for, I think, conversion to gas. There's gas in the general area. I clearly want to keep operating Cardinal as a coal plant as long as possible. And I think that's, as things unfold, it becomes more likely that coal is going to be able to operate longer. But there does appear to be some gas potential in that area. And so having an existing site and a transmission interconnection solves a lot of problems. So we're looking at that, we're evaluating that, we continue to evaluate that. And if we get to the point where, whether it's load growth, whether it's a change in regulations where we need to make a recommendation for new generation, we would do that.
Well, what you're telling us about the transmission and what have you, don't you think it would be proactive now, because I do believe we have a federal administration that's going to work with us, instead of being like with Mr. Obama and that pretty much handcuffed coal right off from the get-go, that we are proactive about what we're doing over at Cardinal to make sure that that plant stays in production. And then if we have excess production, then there's a good chance we'd have something to barter with to help keep the transmission rates more stable. I just really and truly believe that to keep something, I've been there, and the place is flat amazing. Mm-hmm. And there's no reason why we can't, work with somebody. And like I said, now that we have, I think, an administration that's more favorable to that, and they're farsighted enough to know that the need is going to be there. When we're as covered as well as we are for generations, but we're still having to worry about maybe brownouts and what have you with some of our bigger loads, I think it only stands to reason that we do everything we can to keep that plant up and going. And then if we can expand, our gas plants and stuff, that's wonderful as well. But, there's there's a good source of coal in that area, and I just think for the long run, we need to stay right with that.
Yeah, I don't want to mislead you to think that's completely our intention. Staff at Buckeye Power and OREC, our full intention is to operate Cardinal as into the foreseeable future. There's no timeline. I'm just trying to make sure everybody understands what we're dealing with. What's the landscape look like? There's legislative, there's regulatory issues that we have to maneuver through. The expectation is it's an incredibly valuable resource, and we expect to continue operating that. But we have to be, you know.
I think the advantage that we have now is the fact that we have a federal administration that sees the future and knows how hard we've worked to have one of the cleanest burning coal plants in the world, and will, work with us to keep that up and going. And those natural resources, God put them there for us to use, and we might as well take advantage of that as best as we can. And like I said, if we're long on generation, that's wonderful, because, like I said, it also gives us a bargaining tool to keep transmission rates down.
I'm with you, Robert. I'm completely on board with you. Yeah, and that's what we're doing. We're going to advocate as much as we can. NRECA has been working with the Trump transition team. They know how we feel about these assets, and I think they feel the same way. So I think all of that will unfold over the next, let's say, the year, over the course of 2025. A lot's going to be happening, and we're going to focus and make sure as much as we can that they're focused on the things that we need to be able to continue operating that asset.
I'm gonna, Gene, okay. Ryan's coming up right behind you.
Yes, thank you. We talked in the board meeting this morning some about the significant $1 million of federal monies that was approved for Buckeye Power, and things have changed a little bit. Can you elaborate on where that is? Was that money frozen, or is?
Yeah, it was part of the executive orders, a number of them, a couple related to the electric industry, Unleashing American Energy, and the National Energy Emergency Executive Orders. Part of those, I forget which one, but essentially it put a 90-day pause on any funding that came out of the IRA or the IIJA. So, we were an awardee or a finalist for New Era funds through the USDA and RUS. Those effectively have been suspended. Depending on what happens, they may go away. As we talked about, agencies may be redirected to do what they historically did and get them out of the banking business. We'll continue to evaluate that program. Right now, we have made no commitments to do these projects. In addition to Cardinal 3 having to shut down, whether we do some solar or batteries. It was just a proposal we made. We have an option to do that if funding is reestablished, and if it makes economic sense, we will. But as of today, we're in the dark. We're in the dark as much as anybody else that might get federal funding. And I don't even know how to place odds on it. It's not 50-50. It's probably less than 50-50 that this program is refunded in some way, which is fine. It's not a home run for us, as we talked about today, Gene. But we think if it does make economic sense, we should at least pursue it. But I haven't heard anybody say they'll be disappointed if the plug's pulled. And I just don't know how to say if I have no reasonable expectation that it'll be reestablished, but I just don't know.
Craig, we're going to kind of wrap things up. I want to throw you kind of a softball question, I hope. I have a tendency to do these kind of things. Now, so I know, we all know Craig Grooms, the power supply guy, the chief operating officer, now CEO. I know one of the things that I've talked about is, all about market operations and running a power plant, things like that. And you've talked about wanting to kind of get to know the distribution side of the business and kind of just talk to these folks about what your plans are in terms of kind of, getting to know them and getting to know what they do and how we can best serve them and how it can help you personally and help our organization as a whole.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Doug. So this really started a couple years ago, or maybe a year ago when I was COO. I tried to get out and visit a number of co-ops and talk with either the CEO, their senior staff. I presented at a couple board meetings, and my intention over the course of 2025 is to do more of that. Again, I've been in the operational, functional side of things, but I really want to get out to the co-ops, meet with the CEOs, maybe attend board meetings, meet with senior staff just to better understand your community, the things you're dealing with outside of the electric world. I know some of you are in propane or internet provider, just to get a feel for what the co-ops are dealing with, not just at the electric level. I have a decent understanding of how the grid and the distribution system works, but really just to get to know you and your staff and your communities a little bit better. So I'm hoping to start that through 2025 and really just continue that. I think that's important, that my role should be doing that, and so that's what I'm hoping to do over the course of the year, but really keep that going beyond that.
Great. Any last minute questions for Craig? All right. Let's thank Craig for his time here.